Hello and welcome back to the NSE5 journey with me, Ryan. In this next section we're going to continue with the device manager with the second part. For those who don't know, you can contact me here on YouTube, on LinkedIn or Twitter. So what have we covered so far and what's coming up? In our previous video we went over what is the device manager and what it allows us to achieve. We then went into adding a device into the FortiManager. We talked about the different methods that we have, both the wizard to add the device in or the ability to request it from the FortiGate, and we went in and we actually done both those methods in the previous video. And then we finished up talking about the wizards. We went through the add device wizard, the install wizard, the import wizard and the reinstall policy wizard, and most importantly where to find them within the FortiManager. So what we've got coming up in this next section, we're going to first start with an overview of the system dashboard within the FortiManager. And to be honest with you, the whole device manager section within the FortiManager will be reviewed here. In our previous section we discussed some of the bullet points it allows us to achieve, but we didn't really go in and have a play around and see how it actually achieves those points. So this is what we're going to do in this video. This moves us swiftly on to the display functionality. By default, not everything is actually visible within the FortiManager. So an example, you may find when you add a FortiGate device and you're using IPsec tunnels and you want to modify that IPsec tunnel, you're going to notice it's most likely not visible within the FortiManager by default. And as we know, with a top-down architecture, it's really important to ensure that all your changes are made into the FortiManager and installed downstream to the FortiGate device. So we'll have a quick discussion around the display and where you would go if a particular option that is available on the device is not available in the FortiManager. We're going to continue with our install section. Now in our previous video we did talk about the different install wizards, but we didn't really go into installing stuff onto the device. Here what we're going to do is modify some interfaces, create some routing, and then we're going to install it onto the device and then log into the device itself and verify our checks. We're then going to look at the templates. I discussed previously that templates allow us to essentially cut down on the time required to apply system or device level settings to a Fortinet device as it's installed into the FortiManager. So an example of that would be the DNS settings and the SNMP settings. So what we'll do is we'll create a template so we have our read and write strings inside the actual FortiGate and the DNS settings and apply that as the device is added into the FortiManager. And then lastly, we'll look at the restore options, understanding the revisioning history to see what changes were made, and if for whatever reason we need to revert those changes, how we can go about doing it and actually installing that revert change. Okay, so let's get in and have a look at the FortiManager. So once we log into the FortiManager, we're going to double click on the device. We can instantly see an overview. Now this is the system overview of the FortiGate in question. So you can see here the FortiGate within the groups of all FortiGate. Our hostname is FortiGate VM64 and this is the system settings of that FortiGate, not to be confused with the system settings of the FortiManager. So if you were to Telnet or SSH, you have obviously SSH and Telnet to port 2, which is this IP, into the actual device itself. We can look at the host name and change the host name, the serial number. We can look at the date and time and we can change that. We can update the firmware from here. We can look at the hardware stats. What mode is it in? So is it in NAT mode or is it in transparent mode? We can look at the HA pair. So is it a HA pair or is it a standalone? And we can obviously reboot and shut down the device. We can look at the licensing. Again, because it's a VM, it doesn't have any licensing, but this is where you would ensure that the license is valid for the FortiGuard updates and URL check-in. And then over here we can look at the configuration and installation status. So we can look if there's any templates that have been installed on the device. So remember earlier I talked about you can install templates to cut down on some of the configurations required. This will tell you what templates have been installed, if the device has been logged in, how many revisions have actually happened on the device. So essentially every time a change is made, a revision increments, and then we can go into this section, and this is where we actually see historic configuration changes and revert those configuration changes if needed. We can also see the synchronization status just here. This tells us that the FortiManager and the FortiGate are basically talking and both agree upon the configuration status. Installation tracking essentially allows us to identify whether there are configuration changes on the FortiManager that are pending to be installed into the device, or in this case into the FortiGate. If there were configuration changes pending, you can click on this little icon here and it would actually show you the configuration via the CLI, which should show you like a window with a bunch of CLI output essentially to say this is the configuration that's pending to be installed into the FortiGate, and the device settings status will show as modified if there were configurations outstanding. And what we'll do is when we configure something in a moment, you'll notice that we'll go to modified, and then we'll look at the installation preview, and then we'll install it onto the device. Now, I said previously that not everything is available here. So if we go up to the menu and we have a look, we can look at the interfaces, we can look at the HA configuration, we can look at VPN settings, we can look at static routing. But as an example, notice that the VPN only has the SSL VPN settings, no IPsec. Well, if we click up here under the device options, we actually have a load of additional settings that have essentially been disabled. Let me rephrase that. They're not essentially being disabled, but what I mean by that is they're not displaying by default within the FortiManager. So turning them off in here will not disable the device, just the visibility of those settings. So we just, for example, here under VPN, we click all on, hit OK, the page will refresh, and then if we go back under the device by double clicking on it, menu, VPN, notice we have more options for us. What we're going to do is create a configuration change and then install it into the device. So we go back to the device itself, we're going to go double click on it, menu, root, and we're going to go, let's say, system interface. And what we're going to do is we're going to modify one of the interfaces. So we've got port 4 here, we're going to right click and we're just going to edit. And what we'll do is pop an IP address on this interface. Okay, so what we're going to do is give it an IP address. So it'll be 172.16.00 with a net mask of /24 255.255.255.0. It's manual. We'll maybe turn on ping for the administrative access. So that's the only thing anyone can do to this IP address that's on this device. It's in the up state. All looks good. Let's hit OK on that. When we hit OK, the page will refresh, and you can see that the configuration just here has actually been applied to the device. Now if we go back to the FortiGate device, the first thing you'll notice is the device settings here, as previously said, shows as modified. So it's saying, hang on a minute, there is something here that is essentially modified and we need to look about installing it onto the device. So if we click on the installation preview, we can see that the configuration that we put forward is actually here. So when you're happy with that, what we're going to do is actually install it. So up the top, we're going to click the install wizard. It's going to ask us what to install. Now in this case, I'm only going to install the device settings only. Comment, normally you would put in here, maybe there is some change control reference or some comments around why you're actually making the change, what device you want to make those changes on, and then you have the ability to actually go in and have a look at the installation preview. So again, if we click on the preview option, it's going to populate here the configuration that we've seen previously, which it does. We're happy with that. We're going to click install, and now what will essentially happen is it will go into the device and actually modify that interface as if we'd done it on the device itself rather than in the FortiManager. If there's any errors or problems with actually installing the device, installing the configuration onto the device, it will display up here, and then we can actually have a look at which elements failed. Reason why it could fail is if this particular device was in a VDOM, and the VDOM version, the CLI version of that VDOM, is different to the firmware on the device, then you may encounter a few errors because the syntax will change based on the firmware version. So it's important to make sure that your firmware version is correct, so your syntax is correct, so when the FortiManager installs it downstream onto the device, you don't have any syntax errors. Once that's configured, the page will refresh. You'll notice straight away that over here the device settings section will change back to unmodified from modified, which is great. And now if we actually flip back to the FortiGate, we can actually see that configuration has been made. Okay, so here we are about to log into the FortiGate itself to verify our changes. We get an error telling us, hey, this device is managed by a FortiManager. You shouldn't make changes in here because you could cause a conflict. But we can say we're happy with that. We're going to go in read only. Now the change we made was to apply an IP to an interface. So in order to verify that, we're going to go under the System, Network, Interfaces, and we can see straight away port 4, it's got the IP that we've assigned it, and the ping under the administrative access to allow people to ping the interface. Now up here, you got this little icon that essentially says this FortiGate is managed by a FortiManager. What we can do is log in with a read write, and it tells us, hey, you may become out of sync if you do this, but we're going to continue anyway. And what we're going to do is under port 5, we're going to give it an IP address. Let's say 172.18.0.1, and it's going to be a /24, and we're going to do HTTPS, and we're going to hit OK. And that configuration has now been done locally on the FortiGate. Now if we go back to the FortiManager and refresh the configuration, or refresh the device itself, it will say sync status is checking. Now hopefully it will come back synchronized. Synchronized essentially means that the FortiManager and FortiGate is spoken and they both agree upon the configuration revisions. So if we click on the configuration revisions section, you can see here there is an auto update. And from this auto update, you see this little mark over here that shows diff for different. If we click on it and we say we want to see the difference from the previous version, and I want you to show me the difference only, hit apply, and it will say, hey look, someone set 172.18.0.1 with the allow access of HTTPS on this device, and I've captured that as a part of an auto update when I spoke with the FortiGate itself. So there are elements where the FortiGate and FortiManager will talk to one another, and it's important that the synchronization is always up to date. Otherwise, you may get in a situation where people are making changes on the FortiGate directly, and other people are making changes on the FortiManager and installing it, and you can come across conflicts. So it's important that when you implement the FortiManager, if you do go for the top-down architecture with the normal ADOMs rather than the bottom-up architecture with the backup ADOMs, it's important that you install and manage the device fully from the FortiManager to prevent synchronization conflicts and conflicts in general with the configuration that may affect the revision history and in turn prevent you from backing up and restoring configurations correctly. And that's the last thing you want, because one of the major benefits of going to a FortiManager centralized platform is the ability to track, change and restore configurations. So while we're here, I did say that we're going to have a discussion around the revision element. Now you can see on this screen we have the ability up here to retrieve. So we click retrieve, it will actually go ahead and retrieve the configuration from the actual device itself. We also have the ability to import, so that's to import the configuration onto the device. And then we also have the view installation history, which we'll come on to once this retrieval has completed. So there you can see here it's actually being retrieved. It tells you that it was retrieved. If we go into the view installation history, we can see all the different times that we actually installed devices, and if we click on browse, we can look at the configuration that we installed. So earlier, when we created that interface on the FortiManager and installed it downstream onto the device, this was the configuration that was actually installed onto the device. So you've got the historic version there, all the configurations that are installed onto the device. If you click on import, you get the option to choose a file to actually import onto the device. If the file is encrypted, you have to give it a password. And any comments, so previously when we installed that particular installation earlier, not only did it go under the installation history because it was an installation, we can see that it was installed, and we gave it these comments. We said that maybe these were the comments for maybe a change control, for example. And if we were to click revert on this and click OK, it would say reverted from ID 7, so it was at ID 7. A new revision ID will be generated on the install. So if we go back to install now, we go in install device settings only, hit the device. If we look at the preview, it tells you what actually is going to be done. So we're actually going to unset the IP and the allow access from port 5. So again, it's reverting that configuration. If we continued with that install, then it would actually go ahead and remove that configuration. But I'm not going to do that for now. So that gives you an idea essentially of the revision history, which is accessed under the device manager, within the device, and under the configuration and installation status section. Clicking on revision history takes you back there. Gives you an overview of what's going on. You can retrieve configs, import configs, revert back to configs. You can view the installations that were done previously, and you can actually ensure that if there are configuration changes made on a FortiGate device for whatever reason, and you're running that top-down architecture, then you can go in here and you can actually have a look at those configuration changes that were made, revert if needed. And it's important to always ensure that the synchronization is functioning between the two devices. Okay, so the last bit for this video is the provision templates. So device manager, and just at the bottom there are device templates. So if I go back to the groups, you can see just at the bottom there, provisioning templates. Under the provision templates, you have different subsections. Now I said under the device groups, you can see that the system template of default was applied. So we create a new template, let's call it test. Here it is. And you can add widgets. I think all of them are added by default. Yes, they're all added there. And we can apply things like maybe we want Google DNS. Maybe we have a company name for the local domain name, so we're going to apply that. Maybe we have a particular SMTP server that has some authentication and some credentials that we need to apply each time, and we have the SNMP strings that we need to apply to the device, along with maybe a group-wide access where we want to disable or ensure the redirect of all HTTP traffic goes to HTTPS to increase the security. And we have a bunch of replacement messages that we want to put in place if people are trying to maybe access websites they shouldn't be, or trying to authenticate against certain elements within the network. We can create our custom pages and import them here. And FortiGuard, we have the ability to create those device level settings for FortiGuard security updates. Maybe we have syslog server that we want to populate in all of our devices. And then once we've created our template, we have a few ways to assign this. Up here we can click assign devices. We can assign it to a device and hit OK on it. If we go back to the device and groups, click on the device itself, you'll notice that the system template is being changed to test, and hitting here we can actually change it back to default if required. If we were to click install now, again device settings, wait for that preview to appear, you'll notice it's actually added a ton of stuff that we've put into that template. So there's a quick way there to apply it. The other thing you can do with the templates is, once they've created, is remember when we go through adding a device, we went through the login, the discover, add device, under the templates section you can apply the templates that you've created under the provisioning templates section to the device as it's installed. Okay, so touching base on what we've achieved in this lesson. In the previous video we talked about the device manager and what it actually enables us to do. In this video we took that one step further and we actually started to play around with the device manager. We logged in and we looked at the system informations section that it gives us about the device. So the fact that we could telnet and SSH into the device, we can look at the licensing of a device and things like the revision history. We then had a discussion on finding the hidden objects. So I showed you by default not everything's available within the FortiManager, and you have to enable those views to actually edit what you want to edit within the FortiManager to then install downstream onto the device. We made some changes. We made some changes both within the FortiManager. We created a port, popped an IP onto it, allowed ping access and installed it onto the device, went into the device and confirmed that it was installed successful. We then stayed in that device, moved to read and write, and actually installed something upstream into the FortiManager. And the way we done that was the FortiManager itself was clever enough to speak with the FortiGate and to resync with it, and we went into the revision configuration and we were able to see those changes that were made locally on the FortiGate inside the FortiManager. That moved us on to the restoring changes. So I talked about how you can actually view what was installed, what comments were installed around it, how to retrieve configurations, import configurations and revert configurations, and see the differences between them. And then lastly we had a very brief look at templates. I explained the importance of the templates and where you can apply them, both as a device is being discovered or as a device is already being discovered and we need to assign a template to that device and then install it. Then we installed quite a few things throughout the lesson to give you a feel on how to use those wizards, and we'll continue to use the other wizards throughout the course. I hope this video has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing, and if it has been, please do like and subscribe.